On Daf Vav Amid Beis is a very important Rashi that we touched on yesterday, and I'd like to pick up from where we left off. And you'll see this Rashi on Daf Vav Amid Beis approximately 10 lines down from the top. The Gemara quotes a machlokes in a brisa between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Nosson about Havara. The Torah says, Lo savaro eish b'chol moshvosechem. And these two Tanoim address the question, why did the Torah have to bother telling us not to light fires on Shabbos? Havara is in fact one of the 39 malachos, or is it? In fact, according to Rabbi Yossi, the Brisa records his shita that you would not be chayav for Melechas Havara. Melechas Havara is lelavyot, it was taken out of the bag, and it's only an Isur Lav on Shabbos. Whereas Rabbi Nosson came to the conclusion that lechalek yotzos. Now, what does lechalek yotzos mean? Before Rashi, and what I'm saying now is a reflection of a different Rashi, not here but elsewhere. Rashi here interprets that lechalek yotzos, shalotomar eno chayav skila ad sheyachal Shabbos b'chol melachos. That this Havara Lechalek Yotzos is coming lafuke, that you would not be chayev until you violate all the malachos. Lekach Yotzos Havara min haklal lechalek ma Havara miyuchedet she av malacha v'chayev le'akaris skilu b'fnei atzma af kol shu av malacha. So the Havamina was that I'm only chayev for violating the Shabbos if I was able to accomplish all 39 malachos. That would be a feat. And now that the Torah mentions Havara to tell you that you're chayav for Havara, it's really indicative of every single malach. Now, why the Torah chose Havara is something that we'll have to discuss. But I want to discuss with you two questions on this Rashi. One of them is raised by the Marshal and the other by the Mizrahi. So this you'll see in your Yalkut Bi'urim on page Nun, which I assume you have. Yes? Okay. So on the top right, the first major paragraph, Toma Marshal, Mehechetesi Lomar, what kind of Havamin is this? Shalo Yischayev Skila, Kim Basos Kol Malachus Yachma Eksiv, Lo Sasa Kol Malacha, which means don't violate any malacha. The Af Malacha Achas Kriya Malacha. The word Malacha doesn't refer to all 39, it refers to one of the 39. And the Torah says, do not violate one of the 39. So he quotes here Reb Nachum. I don't know if you are familiar with Reb Nachum. He was the Rosh Hashiva in the Mir Yeshiva at the time of Chaim Shmulevitz. And he writes that the Torah says, Lo tasa kol malacha. And the question is, how do you read kol malacha? You can interpret the word kol anywhere in the Bible in two ways, in one of two ways. Either it means kol malacha means all, or it means any. And kol malacha is mashma sheinu chayav ad sheyases kol hamalachos. In other words, until we know otherwise, we assume that the word kol includes all the malachos. Lo tasa kol malachos, meaning kol hamalachos. And I just wanted to mention one example of this kind of methodology where we don't know how to interpret the word kol. Gemara says in the Masechet Brachos that ha'omer halel b'chol yom hareze macharif u'megadef. And the question is, who gets this wonderful accolade of being a macharif or a megadef? What does it mean that he's omer halel b'chol yom? And there are two interpretations in the Rishonim. One says b'chol yom means on every day he wakes up and he recites halel. And the other interpretation is that Kol Yom means any day. Whatever day he's in the mood for, he chooses a day. It was a great day for him. He was feeling groovy. So he recited Hallel. That's just one example. But in the Torah itself, the word Kol could be interpreted in two ways. And the Havamina that Rashi is basing himself on is that when the Torah says Lo Sasa Kol Malach, it doesn't mean any Malacha, but it means all Malachos. Then Reb Nachum quotes others that the Torah says mechalaleh mos yumos, and you're only chayav misa if you are considered mechalaleh. The word mechalel means that Shabbos became a null set for him. He was totally in desecration of Shabbos. There was nothing left. If he was shomer Shabbos, even as far as one malacha, then you would not interpret it as mechalel because he has a kiyum Shabbos with regard to one malacha. Now, what bothers me about the acherim is that in general, we make a distinction between an essay and a losas. So if let's say you have an entire series of essays, you could always argue that if I was Makayim at least one segment of an entire series, at least I achieved the kiyum vis-a-vis that segment. And other mitzvahs, it's all one entity. So for example, if I take a lulav without an esrog, I'm not Makayim the mitzvah of lulav. I don't even get credit for lulav because I have to take 4 or bust. But there are other mitzvahs, let's say Kriyat Shema, where the Torah says b'shal b'chav kumecha, you can be Makayim b'shal b'chav without the kumecha. Tefillin would be another example. The Torah says Chartem al yedecha, tos beininecha, and one of the 2 pairs of tefillin is a kiyum. So as far as esim is concerned, I have no problem in raising a haba, meaning that each part of an essay achieves and accomplishes a kiyum unto itself. But when you get to a los haseh, and the Torah says not to do any malacha, then it's very difficult to assume that you can take a lot haseh, one single segment of a lot haseh, and call it a kiyum, that he was shomer Shabbos vis-a-vis one malacha. I mean, that's not a kiyum of shomer Shabbos. Had it been an essay, and the Torah would command me to abstain from this malacha, that malacha, and I abstained from one malacha, you could call it a kiyum essay with regard to one malacha. But when the Torah says don't do the malachos, that doesn't generate a kiyum such that I can be considered outside of the purview of mechalolel nos yumas because I was Makayim Shabbos with one malacha. I violated 38 out of 39 malachas. One malacha I desisted, and therefore I was Makayim the mitzvah. What do you mean Makayim the mitzvah of Shabbos? You see the language here. Shamar Shabbos the malacha achas. What do you mean Shamar Shabbos the malacha? You were passive because you didn't open up your loom and start weaving, or making threads on your loom. So you weren't in violation of Melechas Oreg. So therefore what? You're Mekayim Shmir Shabbos? Very strange. But if you cross out these words, Kishishamar Shabbos Malacha Achas, just leave those words out. I think the pirush that the Rosh Hashiva brings in the name of Acherim is valid. Why? Because in general, when the Torah prohibits a lav, it means that this is the defined Maisa Vera. In rare occasions, the Torah says that as a result of this Maisa Vera, you were machalel something, you caused chilul. Now, when we talk about chilul, we could say that your desecration of a certain sanctity is a result of an amalgamation that includes the totality of all the actions that are antithetical to that sanctity. So it could be that what the Torah is telling you is kol malachalo sasu, and that would indicate that each malach is a separate avera unto itself, and it's a mais avera, and that's where it starts and that's where it ends. But then the Torah says b'chalalel mos yuma. So when the Torah gets to the ultimate, the culmination, it's after you violated Shabbos. Well, what onesh you chayv? It says mos yumas. There it says mechalalel, and the Torah is revealing to us that it's not just the Maisa Avera that we're concerned with. We're talking about the impact of the Maisa. The Maisa Avera is actually Machalel, the Kedusha Shabbos. It's like a Kohen who enters into a Beis HaKfaros, he's Machalel's Kedushas Kahuna. And it could be that in certain cases, the Torah says that in a Kohen Hedjot, that for the sake of his burying his wife or one of his 7 close relatives, he has to go into the Beis HaKfaros. And then the kiyum mitzvah of the Kohen is to be machal is kedushas kuh. But what I'm saying is that there's an action, and the action is not prohibited per se in and of itself as the be-all and the end-all, but rather because of its impact in undermining and desecrating a kedusha sanctity. And that's what the Torah is pointing out over here with regard to Chil Shabbos. That you're not chai for the malacha, you're chai for the chilul that resulted from the malacha. And here there's a havamina to say that you weren't machal Shabbos unless you You did the entire, you made this day into one of the Sheshis Yimei HaMasa, if you follow me. You imitated God during the Sheshis Yimei HaMasa by implementing all these categories of malacha, or if we take the Mishkan, the Gemara derives the malachas from Mishkan, you, so to speak, built the Mishkan with all 39 malachas on Shabbos. That's the complete chilul of Shabbos. But now he has another kash from the Mizrahi. And this I find very interesting because, the Mizrahi is usually very picky about Rashi al Torah, and asking this kind of question, that kind of question. But here, he asks the most fundamental question that you could ask. How could there be a havamim to say that you're not chayav skila until you violate all the malachas? In the case of a kosheshim, he violated one malacha. We're not exactly sure which malacha. There are three possibilities that the Gemara offers. But whatever it is, kuliyamalo pligi, he did not violate all 39 malachas. He violated only one. Maybe he violated meleches ma'amer. Maybe he violated meleches kotzer. Whatever the malacha might be, and they put him to death with skila. Now that was the prime, paradigmic case where Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know exactly how to put him to death, and he got the word from on high. And the Mizrahi is asking then, did the Gemara not know a parsha in the Torah? I mean, that's not possible. How could there be a havamim that he's not chayav misa of skila unless he violates all 39 more? Yesh Lomar, he's not so sure about it. Shalule halav to lo saviru. Vayisi omer sheskilas hamakodesh ora shahis, which I find very odd. What do you mean ora shah? This was meant to be the paradigmic case from which Moshe Rabbeinu would determine what the law is for Dorei Doros. I mean, it was Torah Shebal Peh, but it was incorporated in Torah Shebal Tzad. So the answer to Moshe's query about what we should do with the Makoshe came from on high, was incorporated in Torah Shebal Tzad, and that is that we put him to death with skila. No. Minadin ain't skila b'chal b'Shabbos ad shichal also b'chol amluchos. That was a horasha. They wanted to make an example of him. So how serious and severe of a violation Chil Shabbos is, so they put him to death. Right? That the Torah had not explicitly mentioned what is the exact punishment. Therefore, Moshe was confused. They knew that he, as a Machal Shabbos, was guilty of a capital crime. They didn't know exactly which of the four Mises Bezdin should apply. Unbelievable. The Mizrahi offers the following possibility, that they didn't know whether he was chayav misa. It wasn't just an issue of which particular Mises Bezdin we should implement. And what was Havmi to say that Chavisha, we just lock him up in jail, but we don't put him to death, because he only violated one malach. So when the word came on high from the Eibush, the revelation was twofold. Number one, that he's chayav for violating one malacha, even though he didn't violate the other 38. And number two, that he's chayav skila. But there was actually a havamina that he would only be chayav if he violated all the malachas. And in the meantime, he's only chayav chavisha. Now, how long are we going to lock him up? Is it a 20-year sentence or a 30-year sentence? I don't know. But then the Mizrahi adds one other point. He says that what HaKadosh Baruch Hu was clarifying would actually come later on, not at the point of Makosh Sheikh. How so? We're going to have to wait till we get to the pasuk of Lo Tzavaru Eish B'Chomosh L'Seichem, and that pasuk is going to tell me that he's chayav bisa even if he violated one malach and not the other 38. So this Mizrahi becomes very, very complicated, very sticky, I would say. And he himself says Shema Yesh Loma, because it would seem that the parsha of Koshesim is a separate, independent parsha. And Hashem was responding at that moment in time to the question of what to do with the Makoshesim. Now you're telling me no. They didn't know the answer until the Torah says, "Lo samaro eish v'chol." That I don't know. Okay, now we have another problem. Because as we said, there are two different Rashis. And in two places, Rashi addresses the question of how to interpret L'chalik Yotzis, Rabbi Yossi Shita. Here in Masechet, I'm sorry, my mistake. I meant to say Rabbi Nosson. Rabbi Nosson Shita of L'chalik Yotzis. Rashi here in Masechet Yoma, in Masechet Yevamot. See where my head is. I'm teaching two Masechet, juggling the two. So Rashi here in Yevamot says that L'chalik Yotzis means that you chai for each malach. However, Rashi elsewhere, this is on the previous page, Memtes, you'll see in footnote number Chavav, and that's Shabbos Daf Ayin, Sofim Daf Hayim and Beis, Sanhedrin Daf Lav and Hayim and Beis, Samach Beis, in four different places in Shas. Rashi says that Avar L'chalik Yotzis means to teach me that if you violate many malachas, you chayv chatas for each malacha. So the Aruch LaNer wants to somehow reconcile these two Rashi. And he says the following: Be'emes the pashtus hakosim shelo sevaru mispareshes Yosef binyan Meizim. We're not talking about chiluk malachas in chatos, shogeg, but rather Meizim. To tell me, as Rashi says over here, that did he violate all 39 malachas? Now, why does the simple interpretation of Lo Savaro Eish refer to a Mazin case? After the Lo Savaro, the pasuk says Kala Ose Bo Malacha Yumos, and Lo Savaro is a lashon tzivui. So we have a tzivui followed by the punishment meted out for a violation of that tzivui. The Torah, we're talking about a case of Mazin. You would never use a lashon tzivui to command a person to avoid what? A shogeg, where he doesn't know? Tzivui is for a Mazin. And the Torah is saying, Lo sevaru. Do not deliberately violate this malacha by lighting a fire on Shabbos. Now again, if it's the Mazin, then you can't talk about chiluk malachas. Chiluk malachas and chatos is only relevant to shogeg. So therefore, Rashi was forced to find a different approach, namely that b'mezid you chayiv only if you're machal the entire Shabbos with all the malachas, or for one malach. Okay. So that explains Rashi here in Masechet Yevamot. Fine. But why does Rashi elsewhere in 5 places say that the purpose of l'chalik yotzis is gaga for chiluk malachos? I'm sorry, chiluk chatos. So now the Aruch LaNer invokes the sugya in Masechet Sanhedrin, on Daf Ayin Ches. There the Gemara quotes the pasuk v'ish ki yakeh kol nefesh adam mos yumas, and we're talking about a murderer who has to be put to death. And there's a machlokas tanoim recorded there in Masechet Sanhedrin. And once again, we get back to our original question: how to interpret the word kol? Does kol mean any part of a whole, or does kol mean the entire entity as a whole? So the Chachamim say that when the pasuk says each kiyake kol nefesh, it means the entire nefesh and all its parts. Like if a person says hal b'chol yom, it means every day of the year he says hal. Or in the case of mechaleh mos yumas, the Torah says lo sasa kol mulacha. It means all of the malachas. And therefore, dafka makes kol nefesh lo miktas. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, he holds that af hamakim miktas nefesh chayev. So what happens? Let's say you have 10 people standing in a line, each one's holding a stick. and they're all taking their turns, one after the other, beating someone to death. And according to the Chachamim, basically the nefesh is destroyed in increments, in sections. And it's very hard to understand this because you and I would have said, let's figure out if he's alive or dead, whether it's brain death or respiratory, whatever your definition of death is. But there's someone who caused his death, but that's not how the Chachamim see it. The Chachamim see it as one long Maisa Hakah, that if you took a look at the Maisa Hakah as one entity, and now the Hakah comes in stages, then the Hakah as one entity takes away the Nefesh in increments. And the Torah says, Makeh Kol Nefesh you must. And what is the Kol Nefesh teaching me according to Chachamim? That you've got to take the entire Nefesh from A to Z. But if you take A away and then someone else comes along and takes B away, until finally the last guy clinches it and he causes death, no one's. That's the Shita of the Chachamim, and they derive from the pasuk Kol Nefesh. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says no. The last one is Chayiv, even though he only took part of the Nefesh, but Kol means any part of the Nefesh. And I have to sort of backtrack a little bit, clarify that. It doesn't mean any part of the nefesh, but it means it means the critical part of the nefesh, but it could be part of the nefesh. So the any, interpreting the word kol as any part, meaning you don't have to take away the entire nefesh. You can take away that part of the nefesh that, his life is hanging in the balance, and he's holding on to that last nefesh, and if you take away that nefesh, you are the murderer. And you are chai because we interpret kol as referring to even less than the entire entity, the entire nefesh. Okay. Now, he says, Pirish Aran, Shaloshin kol kol shtei mashmos, yech kol shekolas, kol adover, kol tzipa torah tochelu, v'chein kol ha-mitzvah sharnofi mitzvah eschem, lo sechaya kol neshama, etc. However, yesh mashmos mikzas adov. Sometimes the word kol seems to indicate part of it, not the entire entity. So when we say kol tzipar Torah, means all the members of that class of tziparim tahorim. And if the Torah promises you a reward for kol mitzvah sharanofi mitzvah estem, it means the reward is for any mitzvah, so the kol could even be part. I'm sorry. Kol, wait a minute, I don't know. Mitch, do you remember the end of the pasuk there? Okay. Kol mitzvah sharanofi mitzvah eschem. Okay, it slips my mind now what the end of the pasuk is. Well, yeah, I have a chumash somewhere here. Oh, great. Steve is my chumash man here. Always rely on him. So then it means all the mitzvahs. Again, we have to finish this pasuk, but at the end of the pasuk, it indicates it's referring to all the mitzvahs. And that's kol mitzvah. However, there's another pasuk that says lo tzechaya kol neshama. So you have all of the the people who occupy the land of Israel, and you shouldn't allow any one of them to be alive. So kol neshama means any of them. Well, lo sochal kol toev. Kol toev means any toev. You can't eat this kind of Easter or that kind of Easter. Oh. Now, in a case that you can interpret the word in two ways, and there's no clear-cut answer to this question of what kol means, like here in the case of murder, where the Torah says, Iyake kol nefesh. So what's kol nefesh? Did he take the last part of the nefesh, or he started from the beginning and took the entire nefesh? So on that we have a machlokas. Let's just line up the sheets. According to Chachamim, whenever we have a possibility of two interpretations of the word kol, then we say it means the entire entity. And then so just underline, I'll come back, I'm just skipping the last 3 words or 4 words on the bottom right column here. Let's go on to the top left. He held that what is the word kol nefesh means any part of the nefesh. Okay, now let's go back to the words that I skipped. According to Chachamim, that kol nefesh means the entire nefesh. And therefore, if 10 people wait online, each one subsequently hits the guy, none of them are chayav, not even the last one is chayav. Then when it says kol malacha, so when it says kol malacha, we're going to interpret it according to Chachamim that it means he violated all the malachas. Because kol, according to Chachamim, means all the malachas. And our sugya in Yuma, Rashi interprets in the light of the Shittas Chachamim. But according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, kol malacha means even malacha achas, because kol means any part of a whole. And there's no need, therefore, to separate lo sevaro eish b'chol sechem to teach me that you be chayiv for even one malacha. We know that you're chayiv for one malacha because kol malacha means any malacha. So Rashi now has to come up with a new interpretation of havara lechalek yotzes. It can't be referring to shogeg. I'm sorry, it cannot be referring to mezid. It has to, by default, be referring to shogeg. And therefore, Rashi interprets all over Shas in a way that will reflect the Shita of Yehuda ben Beseira that lo savaro eish b'chol sechem is a case of shogeg, and it's teaching me chiluk malachas that if you do many malachas be'elanachas, you bring a separate chatas for each malach. The kan, that is the punchline of the Aruch line there. So we're on the left column, line number 6, 1, 2. The kan here in Yuma, here in Yevamos, Pirish Rashi I'll leave it the Chachamim. And l'shitasam kol malacha means the entire entity. Like the Chachamim say, you're only chayav as rotzech if you take away the entire nefesh. So therefore, you have to violate all the malachas. For that, havar lechalek to teach you that you're even chayav on one malach. I mean, the only slight comment I would add here that bothers me a little bit, but it's not critical, is that why does Rashi interpret our Gemara according to the Chachamim and 5 places in Shas according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira? That's a little bit odd. But again, it could be I'm missing a piece of information, and maybe in this case we pass them like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. And I'd have to open up a Rambam in Hilchus Rotzeach. Anybody want to do that? I mean, first you have to open up the Gemara in Sanhedrin on Yikhes, so it's a bit of a job. Plus, if we're going to have to flip through the entire Hilchus Tzela, Hilchus Rotzeach, it may take us a little time. But if you open up Sanhedrin on Yikhes, you could get a shortcut by looking in the Ein Mishpat. He'll tell you where in the Rambam. And I'd be excited if, by chance, the Rambam paskins like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Okay, it doesn't matter. We can survive. Okay. Now, what happens with a person who's chayav misa on, right, either with streifo or any of the other chiyuvei misas bezdin, and it's Shabbos. And we derive from lo savaro eish b'chol moshvo sechem, the extra 2 words, b'chol moshvo sechem, as a reference to bezdin, in a case of Bezdin that's obligated to implement the death penalty, and the Torah is saying lo sevaru eish. So that the mitzvah of the humas that we discussed yesterday, that obligates Bezdin to put a condemned capital criminal, 3 C's, condemned capital criminal, to death, does not override the Shabbos. Now we get to a very fundamental question, something of salvation speak about very often. Avamina was that Vahumas overrides the Shabbos. Maskani is lo savaru eish b'chol moshvos sechem. Now, when Bezin implements the death penalty, they're violating full-fledged malachas. Well, I shouldn't say violating, because we're going to get to the Shittas HaRambam here. But he's certainly implementing any one of many, many different malachas. We said in the case of Sreifa, the malacha Bishul. In other cases, certainly the malacha Netilas Neshama, and there probably are other malachas. So if you were the Rambam, so to speak, and you were codifying this halacha, what would you write? I'm going to give you 2 options. Would you write that if Bezdin implements the death penalty on Shabbos, they're violating Melechet Shabbos? Or would you write that if Bezdin will implement the death penalty on Shabbos, then you violate the lav of Lo Sevaru Eish B'chol Moshvos Sechem? And the 2 approaches are both very compelling, because in the first approach, what we're saying is that the mitzvah of a humas incumbent upon Bezdin does not override the Shabbos. So the malacha is intact. You have nothing to override. The second approach is also very compelling, because what it says is that logically the humas does override the Shabbos. Call it Esei Docholosaseh, or the Kal V'chomer of Rav Shimi, based on the fact that the humas is more common than avodah, and avodah is more common than Shabbos. Now we have maskana, but maskana is lo sevaru eish b'chol moshvos sechem. So the Rambam writes, he tells you in Perikov Dalet Halacha Vav for Shabbos, ein onshim b'Shabbos. We don't implement onshim on Shabbos. Yavol piche ha'onech u'mitzvus aseh eino doche Shabbos. Eitzad harichin eschai v'bezdin malchus o misa ein malchus oso v'ein b'misan oso b'Shabbos. Shenemar lo sevaru eish b'chol moshvos sechem b'yom haShabbos. V'zu as hara lebezdin shelo yisrafu b'Shabbos mishen iskayev sreifa v'hu adin l'shar onshim. This is unbelievable. The Rambam is writing that if Bezdin were to put to death a condemned criminal, they would not be chayev for malachos because esei docholosas. They're fulfilling the essay of a humas. But they'd be violating the Isur Lav of Lo Sevaru Eish. So the Rambam says that this Lav is for Onshim. If Bezdin implements Onshim on Shabbos, they violate the Lav of Lo Sevaru Eish. B'chol Moshvos Sechem. B'chol Moshvos Sechem is addressing Bezdin. This is very fascinating because classically we understand there's only one lav of Shabbos, and that is mechamer acher be'emta. All the rest of malachos. Now, according to Rabbi Yossi, we can add havara. Havara is taken out of the klal of 39 malachos, and it's a lav without being a malach. So we've got 2. Now we're going to add a 3rd. The Rambam Shita is that if you light a fire on Shabbos, you're chayav for one of the 39 malachos. In that sense, the Rambam Paschal like Rabbi Nosson. But on the other hand, the 2 extra words, b'chol moshvos sechem, are teaching me something about lo sevaru eish. And that is that if the Sreifa is for the purpose of implementing a Mises Bezdin, then Lo Savaru. So the Rambam says this is allowed without being a Malacha of Onshin. Implementing Onshin on Shabbos is a violation of a law. So now we have three laws. We've got the law of Machamed. We have the law of Sreifa, according to Rabbi Yossi. And now we have a law of Onshin. If Bezdin would implement an Onish on Shabbos, and by the way, the Rambam includes not just Sreifa, he includes Malchus. Now, I'm not sure if Malchus entails any violation of any of the 39 malachas. It could be that it depends upon what's called Makalkel b'chabura. That's a machlokas tanoim. Chabura meaning if you wound a person. I'm not even 100% sure that in the case of Malchus, you have to wound a person. I mean, I did learn Masechet Malchus once, but I don't recall, again, I wouldn't rely on my memory, anywhere where it says you have to draw blood when you give Malchus. The Gemara has a long discussion about hitting him on this side, hitting him on that side. He's leaning, he's not leaning. And what kind of shliach bezdin they should appoint. He shouldn't be too strong because he might kill the guy. But I don't know if the Gemara ever says that you have to inflict a wound on a person. So where's the malacha in Malchus? And the Rambam says that if you give Malchus on Shabbos, it's a violation of the Isur Lo Savaru H B'chol Moshel Sefer. They didn't light any fires, but Onshe Bezdin is a violation of the law of Shabbos. Separate law. There might be another law in Shabbos, I'm just mentioning it in passing, of Chutz L'Tchum. That depends on Rabbi Akiva and the Chacham, where Tchum is Doraisa. Because the Torah says, Al Yetzei Ish Mimkomo B'Yom HaShabbos. It depends on how you read the pasuk, whether it's Al Yotzi or Al Yetzei. If it's Al Yetzei, it's more Torah Shebal Peh, then it means you're not allowed to leave your Makom on Shabbos. Makom means your Tchum Shabbos.
Oh, happened to me now.
Yeah, what do you say? Rabbi Kapustin, I heard something.
No, it's okay, it's okay.
Okay. So I want to point out here that the Rambam accepts the Shita Rabbi Nosson, that Havar L'Lav L'Chalik is. And Havar is one of the 39 malachos. But I want to connect that with B'chol Moshel Sefer, the separate laws that the Rambam has for Onshi Bezdin. Now, in this case, Steve, I'm going to have to ask you, just get me around the Hilchos Shabbos if I can show you. So that means Zmanim. It's on this wall, right here behind you. I mean, the advantage of this room is that it's a little bit set aside, but the disadvantage is that it's only got an English library. It's a great English library, but for my purposes, I need a different kind of library. You know, Pesach Krohn is not going to help me. I mean, he could help me if you could see it, but his storybooks are not going to help me understand Sugi. I just realized the Cole's learning of the Shabbos. Maybe it's hard to find around. Steve, don't bother me. I just wanted to know if the Rambam in his Minyan HaMitzvos, in his introduction to Hilchos Shabbos, mentions Onshin on Shabbos. I'd be very excited if he did, because I think that's what comes out of this whole discussion. Well, what do I want to point out over here is that the connection between L'Chalek Yotzes and the love of Onshin. What's the connection? The Havamina of Rabbi Nosson was that violate many malachas on Shabbos. All right, so forget it. Yeah, because they're learning Shabbos now. So one of the guys probably has it. So I'm sorry. So listen to this, Steve. According to Rabbi Nosson, the Havamina before Lo Sevaru L'Chalek was that if you violate many malachas on Shabbos, you will bring one chatos, and that'll cover you for everything. Meaning that Lisha and Ktsira equals Dam and Dam, or Chelev and Chelev. You're repeating the same violation, the same Issa twice. Now, the lumdus is that all 39 malachas really are one Issa. The Torah says, don't do malach on Shabbos. You can call it this, call it Licha, call it Ktsira. They're just different manifestations, if you will, of that Issa of not to do Machal Shabbos with malach. So there's a generic concept called malacha that encompasses all the 39. You don't have to violate all the 39, that we know. But if you repeat the same Issa twice, because each malacha is really the same identical Issa of Kol Malach Lo Sasu and Mechalev Os Yumas, then you could bring one Karmel Chatas and pat yourself up. You can kill many birds with one stone. What are we deriving from Lo Savaro Eish, which is called in the language of Rabbi Nosson, L'chalik Yotzes, that you have to bring a separate carbon for each malach? What we're deriving is that each malach is a separate Isa unto itself. And now I can prove it to you. I'm going to prove to you that Shabbos is made up of many, many Isurim, multiple Isurim. Haraya, that you're not allowed to punish a person, a criminal, on Shabbos. And for Onshe Bezdin, whether it be Malchus or Misa, you violate a separate law. So we know that there's at least one separate law which you cannot swallow up in the malachas. So now it makes sense to say that Shabbos is made up of a myriad of independent malachas. I mean, the counter argument to that would be, well, maybe all the malachas fit into one entity, and they're all repetitions of the same aver, the same Isur. And Onshe Bezdin is a separate. That's a separate Isur. It's not a chiyuv. It's not a chiyuv malach. Shemidvarav nira shafilu she'ein ba'onesh chil Shabbos also lanush b'Shabbos. Oh, I didn't cheat. He says Shari b'Malchus ein chil Shabbos. He's assuming also you don't have to draw blood in Malchus. So what does he mean? V'docha klo shegam b'Malchus. Oh, okay. He may wound him with a black and blue mark. Okay, I'm not sure. I mean, agree with everything the Aruch LaNer is saying, but I'm not sure why is he leaving this with a question mark. What number is this? Mem Gimel. I don't know. Because of Bibir Advarim, Shemiacha Shegilsa Torah, the Echad Haonshin, She'ein Manishnos Shabbos Shuvi Al Fini Be'Hekdesh Mimishvar Echad Yelachem Lakish Kol Onshin Bezin. Fine, I agree with everything he's saying. The less are Leonesh B'Shabbos. Okay, great. I mean, that is what the Rambam is saying. That is separate Isur Onshim on Shabbos. We saw it from Malchus. So now he quotes the Rabbi Yerucham Perla. He lived about a century ago, a little bit more than. Shemikevon shehizir hakos v'es bezdin b'asaros la al onesh misa b'Shabbos al af she'ein habezdin atzmon b'misa nesanidol al nereg al yidei achirim so she'osru tol bezdin es matziru al onesh im kain ein makom onesh yitol Shabbos onesh acher. I think that the Reed Perlow is just adding another proof that the Isser Onshin is a separate Isser that doesn't entail any malacha whatsoever. It's not included in the 39, but it sets itself up independently as a category of an Isser. And its proof is from the fact that Bezdin themselves don't implement the Oneg. They appoint a Shliach. And yet this Isser is addressing itself to Bezdin. That their violation here of Shabbos is a result of the fact that they commanded an agent to implement a punishment on Shabbos. So even though the Bezdin themselves are not in any way responsible for Chil Shabbos, yet the Torah prohibited them. Be interesting to think that maybe this is the source for Mira Lenachri Shvus. You're not allowed to tell a guy to do malacha for you on Shabbos. Maybe this is the source because the Torah is addressing Bezdin and telling them not allowed to set up a shliach to give the onus. And now we have a mechilta. The mechilta says Sreifa b'chlal ha'is v'yatza l'lamed ma Sreifa she achas mi misos Bezdin Eino doches HaShabbos. Okay, fine. I've called Mrs. President. What's the? I think he's saying that the Mechilta is much more outspoken about it. To extrapolate or expand from the specific to the general, from the case of Sreifa as one of the four Mrs. President to the other three categories of Mrs. President. V'im geter ha'isur hu mishum shelo hutra moleches Shabbos mipnei mitzvahs haseder v'humas lama tzarich lilmod es kol shar Mrs. Bezdin v'vidas kol davar shay b'chlal lo pshita shekol Mrs. Nes. What he's saying is that if despite the fact that putting a condemned criminal to death is a mitzvah, nevertheless it doesn't override the Shabbos in the case of Sreifa, then it shouldn't override the Shabbos in the case of any of the mitzvahs. There's no reason to single out Sreifa. So therefore, we have no choice but to assume that Sreifa is just what we call a klal. In other words, it's a prat, but it's a klal. And what is that klal? Onshim. We cannot implement onshim on Shabbos. Okay, there's a lot more here, but I want to go back, if you'll get me, to the Gemara on Daf Zayin. Okay. Ella, it's, let's see where we're holding. We're on Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, and we're about halfway down the Amud. The first, you see Tosas D'Rasa Shenemar. You make a line across, you'll see a few lines below that, a line that starts with the word Chumrah. Again, that's not going to help you if you have a Steinsaltz, but I'm assuming that he would also break it down into a separate paragraph. What do you mean on top of the page? She doesn't have the first half of the page? Oh. So you mean Amud Aleph in Steinsaltz could be on this side of the page?
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I'd go crazy for that. because my orientation is that Amid Aleph is on the left and Amid Beis on the right. Remind me of a story. The Rav needed a watch, so somebody bought a watch for the Rav, and it was a digital watch. So I remember he kept looking at the watch during Shir, and he couldn't figure it out. So somebody asked the Rebbe, "Well, what's the problem?" He says, "I'm so used to seeing it geometric, I can't figure out how to read it." Depends what you use. I knew he would have it on as a separate paragraph. I didn't know it would be first on the top. Ella Itzra. So again, we're going back to the old question. Why do we need the pasuk Oleha to teach me that Yibum does not apply in the case of Achos Ishto? At this point, we're assuming like Rav Shimi, that the brisa that derives from the pasuk Lo Savaro H had a Havamina that was based on a Kal V'chomer, that Misa would override Shabbos because the Kal V'chomer, because Misa's Bezdin is greater than Avoda, which is in turn greater than Shabbos. But there was never a Havamina that Esei Dochel also says Sheish Bo Karnas. So why do we need Oleh? So the answer is because of the essential nature of Mitzvahs Yibum, which means we override the erva of Eishes Ach by definition. That is what Yibum is all about. Isalka Daitachamino, I would have thought. A heavy high Eishes Ach, Dover Shahay Bechlal, Yotzim in a Klal, Lelamin, Lo Lelamin al Atzmo Yotza, Lelamin al Klal Kuli Yotza. The Torah is telling you not something about Eishes Ach in particular. Eishes Ach was included in a category, in a bag, so to speak, that has many different members of the bag, and they're all arayos, and the Torah combines them together into one entity. In Parshas Kedoshim, it says, "Ki kol asher yaseh mikol hatoevos ha'elu v'nichrasu hanafashos ha'osos mikerav hamam." So after listing all the individual arayos, the Torah joins them together as one group, and therefore Eishes Ach belongs to that group, and that's called the Dover Shayi B'Chlal. And yet, v'yotzim in a klal, the Torah commands you in the midst of Yibum and tells you that forget about the erva of Eishes Ach. And now we apply the principle of yotzim in a klal alamed, not al atzmu, but al klal kuli yotzim, tell me that whatever that klal was in this particular scenario, that klal doesn't apply. Meaning the klal was that you're not allowed to violate any of the arayos. Once we take one of the various arayos out of the bag, and in the situation, the scenario of Yibum, we're allowed to override that erva, that isur, then it's indicative of the fact that the entire klal and all the arayos are allowed in the case of Yibum. There's no isur Yibum in the case of arayos. Now I'm wondering out loud here, how far would you go with this? In other words, if you're applying the principle of Davar Shayi B'Chlal, V'yotzim B'Chlal, L'lamin Al Kol HaKlal, and Kuli Yotza, what would be if you could, piggyback one erev on top of another, on top of another, on top of the other? Or, for example, if we talk about arayos sheyesh b'hem chiyuv mitzas bezdin, but I'm thinking, I'm not sure, like one of the arayos that we have in our mission is imo, am I correct? Or bito. I mean, these are chayve miso situations. Right, bito, and then he has moso is a chiyuv miso. There are a lot of cases here that occur chiyuv miso. Unless we're saying it's got to be similar to Eishes Ach, right? Because Eishes Ach is the one that was yotzim in a klal, lilamed al klal kulo, as far as an erva of a chiyuv karetz, like achos ishta would also fit into that klal, but not imo or bito or chamosa. Sanya, we learned to the brisa. Dover shayu b'chlal yotzim neklal. Lo l'lavin al atzmi yotza l'lavin al klal kuli yotza. The Gemara and the brisa itself explains Ketza. Give me an example of this methodology. And by the way, this is the brisa of Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel is the brisa of Hamido Shator Midreshes. So this is one of those midos. Over, yeah. Hanefesh, we're in Vayikra Perek Zayin. Vanefesh asher tochal basar mizevach hashlom nashel Hashem v'tum oso olam v'dichus hanefesh hahi me'amel. So the Torah singles out shlomim in the context of the isur of achilas kodshim tmeim, for which you have karet. Valo shlomim b'chlal kol kodshim hayu. Now, where's the source for this shlomim b'chlal kol kodshim hayu? So that's a pasuk in the same chapter. It says, Kol ish asher yikrav mikol zarachem el hakodshim asher yakdishu bnei Yisrael Hashem v'tumaso olo v'nichras ha'nefesh hahi milafana. So the pasuk says, mikol zarachem, right? Any Jew, asher yikrav el hakodshim v'tumaso olo. So the pasuk clearly indicates that all kodshim are included in this chiyuv kares of kodshim b'tumah. So therefore, lama yatsu. Why does the parsha mention shlomim specifically for the chiyuv kares of achilas b'tumah, achilas kodshim b'tumah? Lahakish aleim the lama lecham ashlom miyuchadim shu kodshei mizbeach af kol kodshim mizbeach yatsu kodshim berekamayis. Now, what does it mean, Yatsu Kodshei Berekabayis? We talk about eating B'tumah, and the answer is he was Magdish for Berekabayis food stuff. That's a little bit unusual. Usually, for Berekabayis, you dedicate a certain amount of funds or an object of value, but here he dedicated food. And he was Mechil a Chaloshem Kodshei Berekabayis on the food. And we could sell the food on the market and use the money for Berek HaBayis. Now he was Tamid, he ate the macholim of Kodshei Berek HaBayis before Pidyon. So will he be chayiv kares for eating this food that is sanctified with Kedushas Berek HaBayis, and he's Tamid? And the answer is no, because that's not similar to shlomim. Because shlomim is miyuchadim shem kodshim mizbeach, whereas Berek HaBayis doesn't have kodshim mizbeach. So now shlomim is taken out of the klal. So that we can now learn from Shlomim that there's a chiyuv kares for achila b'tumah for all zman, and that's called kol kodshim mizbeach. I'm only thinking out loud here. Would you get malchus if you ate, let's say, chatos or chatos b'shogeg b'tumah? Because the Torah only spells out tumah in the case of shlomim. We have a klal prat aim, right? Lo yotza klal l'lamed alatzmo klal kulo. I'm not sure if that's enough to give him a chiyuv malchus. or curries? I think the answer is yes, but I'm not sure. Anyway, Hachanami, just to finish up, is here too. Hi, Eshisak Falko Raisa, Saloma Yotza, Lahakish, Lev Lomolcha, Ma Eshisak Sharia, for the sake of Yibum, is Afkal Arayas Nami Sharia. So this is where we'll stop for today. Okay, then, so tomorrow is Wednesday, correct? Okay. I need the.